In episode 1, we talked about sacred refusal, the kind I found in Toni Morrison's character Baby Suggs, the kind that gave me courage to reject theologies that couldn't hold my rage, my grief, or the truth of my lived experience. In episode 2, we explored womanism and womanist theology, the ways that it gives us permission to tell the whole truth, even if yonder calls it a lie. Then, in episode 3, we went all the way back to the hush harbor, to the laughter happening deep in the backwoods, to that carved out clearing that made space for all of who we are. Black faith and spirituality in America is powerful technology because it allows Black people not only to imagine themselves free, but to risk their lives to make liberation a reality. Even when yonder tries to stamp it out, that intelligence will never disappear. It evolves. When the hush harbor faded into the shadows of history, it didn't die, it shifted. From the brush to the block party, from ring shouts to rhyme schemes, it found a breakbeat. I'm Tamise Spencer Helms, and this is Black Modern Mystic. In this episode, I'm joined by DJ, podcast host, and cultural theologian Xavier Brandon, and Nick George the poet, an author, DJ, and spoken word artist. And in this episode, we're going to talk about our favorite genre, hip-hop, and something called theopoetics. In this episode, we'll jump into conversation about how hip-hop is not just music, it's memory, it's method. To me, it's a hush harbor with bass.
Consider this.
This is Nick George the poet, an artist, theopoet, parent, and creative living in Richmond, Virginia. And this is a rendition of a poem he wrote called Greater to the Public. It was a commission project that showcases his talent as a poet, as a writer, and as a person who understands the times. I wanted to introduce you to Nick before we enter the interview. Here is Greater to the Public.
Consider this. As a story makes its way into the lives of millions, as it becomes the catalyst for potential and kinetic energy made real, just as the lives of others become the lives of ours, you are telling it. Not exactly the wind beneath wings, no, but all things considered, you are helping tell it. Finding ourselves at this crux of culture where the work in life is the work of life. We don't just live these days, we rally, we rage, we explore, we fight, we strive to thrive and lift voices high and raise questions higher. Our stories don't just live on our block or corridor, our district or region, they expand like full lungs, breathing out more life, further crossing counties, countries and continents, racing through rivers and roadways, and all the while you are helping tell it. So to that, we say, keep on. Keep on climbing that mountain and pushing these tales to reality. Keep pushing on. If life is a highway, ride us into the beyond, past copper fields, urban scenes, and dreams that stay rustic. All the bumps, bounces, and bruises that still stay bubbling, and all the stories that bring smiles and truths that stay troubling, and the ways that you bring something greater to the public. Keep on telling it. Tell it like it is. Tell it like we want it. And at times how we need it. Tell it on the 5th of July, after fireworks wear down, and on the 31st of October, fearless and bold, remember the 5th of November, and each day since and each moment that follows, explore valleys low and the mountains above it. Tell it and consider how you bring something greater to the public. My cousin had a copy of Biggie's Ready to Die album, and he was playing Notorious Thugs. And I remember, I didn't even really know or care about Bone Thugs and Harmony, but when I heard Christopher Wallace use rhyme in a way that school said to do this way, but he's doing this way, it just felt like, how dare you? Oh, you can do that? Oh, shoot, let me dig this thing. My parents weren't having it, so I had to sneak and listen to it. Hence why my cousin was like that access point.
But hip hop has always been presented to me as a sand tray, a sand table. You know, it's a playground space for language and expression and experience. And I think that I think it's just another step in the timeline of clearing spaces, of hush harbors. I love everything about collectives of people that have found a way to exist in spite of. So if we start to just stay with the 20th century and you look at the Harlem Renaissance and how after the migration up north, people are just trying to figure out how to live, somebody's saying to themselves, they don't know how we sing. They don't know what we're really made of. Fine, let's show them. And you have this whole movement of artists, different people, different identities, different functions within this movement, but all committed to Black expressionism. Fast forward a little bit to the Black arts movement of the 60s and 70s. You got Gil Scott-Heron, you got Maya Angelou, you got Nikki Giovanni, Gwendolyn Brooks. You got all of these amazing poets who are once again, despite losing so many leaders during the 60s, saying to themselves, they still don't know how we do. Let's show them. Let's take these words and whip them something new. And then hip hop follows quickly behind that because they're all still connected. There's still a daringness. There's still a nerve involved. Like, how dare you take this? How dare you do this with the records? How dare you do your feet that kind of way? It's just a daringness to it that I've always fell in love with. And I think while we don't immediately look at them as spiritual technologies, I think it's still like embedded in how they flow and how they move. When you look at the expansiveness of spirituality, you know, it's hard pressed to be satisfied with one type of language. So I look at theopoetics as an approach to exploring spirituality with a lot of the applications of poetic devices. What is a greater metaphor than God and Christ and the cross and the blood? You know, what else can we use other than poets to understand omni? So everything about that is invitational to me. I still feel very new to the concept because I spent so many years trying to lock down the specifics, trying to homogenize my perspective of it. Theopoetics feels like permission to say, let's look at all of it. Let's have fun with this. Let's get really creative. If God created the universe, why stick over here? There's a lot. So theopoetics, I think, lends itself to an exploration of safety in spirit, and that feels like a really nice place to like dig root and lay seed.
For Nick, the thing that connects Baby Sug's Sermon in the Clearing, womanist theology, hip-hop, and the Hush Harbor is the use of language, the ability to speak in your own tongues. When I asked Nick how he thinks theopoetics, or this particular use of language, can serve us as we think about where we go next in terms of faith and church, here's what he had to say.
Language is everything to me. I think language gives us the opportunity of expressing things, and I like the wrestling of it. Where is hip hop now? We got to commit ourselves to looking for where the Spirit of God is moving and be flexible enough to find it there and delight in it there and not get stuck in the one place, right? If we're committed to placemaking and taking up space on this planet with all the natural resource available to find altars, let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let's find it.
Nick notes that all hip-hop does not contain the same technology of resurrection that we've been talking about this season. He points out that as you grow and mature in wisdom, what you are attuned to in music will change. He talks about his own evolution in recognizing and finding the resurrection technology that exists in hip-hop's theopoetic stance.
But as I'm past my super young years, as I'm getting older, my appetite for truth telling has changed. And when I see hip hop still engaging in telling the truth as we've transitioned to a new stage in life, as Little Brother drops a new album, Jay drops 444, Clips is dropping a new album, like They're still here, they're still telling their truth, and those who still have an appetite for it can find it. At the same time, I think the young people are finding their role in what Baby Suggs is trying to encourage us to do. Let the men cry, let the women sing, let the children dance, and then when it's time, flip. The kids are crying now, but I think they're going to rotate soon, and there's a lot of, let's just even say black music. Let's not even limit it to hip hop. Black music is doing this rotation to where I'm gonna do country and soul. I'm gonna do techno and house. I'm gonna find a space for R&B and ska, right? So I think there's life being had once we recognize that these old tools, these old wineskins don't fit anymore, right? Why are you still looking in this cave? It ain't here no more. So life is being found as hip hop and black music doesn't look the way it does, but there is still space for the ritual and the tradition of it. Because boom bap is still gonna hit. I don't care who you are. What hits it, like that's indescribable, but being able to play with it and have fun with it and continue to explore with it and tell the truth. They got the nerve to ask the questions. They got the nerve to not be impressed, to say, I'm not fed off of this plate, this hyper masculinity, this commodification of the divine feminine. That doesn't feed me anymore. They're the ones with the nerve to say it. And I think in many ways, the young people are giving cats like me permission to also ask those questions. Well, what am I hungry for? Right? What do I have the appetite for? When hip hop was coming up, we only had a couple of boxes to put it into because we didn't have the language and we didn't know really how to apply it. So we just made it do what it do. Right? But after a while, each evolution of it only happened because people's appetites had been changing. I think as those appetites change, we give ourselves more space and more permission to ask the questions, which, from my understanding, is the act of querying anything. What else can be done? I'm not satisfied with what's available. It did work for a minute. It don't work anymore. What I'm excited for is when that doesn't come from a place of harm, right? When those questions don't come from a root of trauma. When, because I'm hurt by this, I have to find something else. And I'd love to see it turn into, I have the freedom to ask these questions because enough room has been made. Because Baby Suggs laid down the information and the invitation to say, come on, find where you fit in, and then when it's time, rotate.
This is Xavier Brandon, also known as Professor X. He's a hip hop recording artist, a DJ, a radio personality, and a curator who I met on the campus of the Atlanta University Center doing campus ministry work. We found one another because of our shared love for hip hop and for the ways that hip hop's truth telling could be a foundational basis for the work we were doing for students. He's going to talk to us about his own love for hip hop and what it has to do with resurrection technology.
I think if you look at Baby Suggs and what she was able to say of like, you got to accept all of you. They're going to tell you, they're going to despise your skin. They're going to despise your dance and they're going to despise the way you raise your hands and stuff. But you have to have permission. You have permission to be fully authentic to yourself. I think hip hop pushes that boundary all the time, to be authentic, be real. I think that when you think about, battle culture or, the most famous, of course, recently has been the Drake versus Kendrick beef. And a lot of uh, a point of a battle is to prove that your opponent is not who they say they are, and I think that lends to certain spaces when you're in a battle. You can tell like, are you really this type of person? Let me pick your whole character and your demeanor and your persona apart and show the world who you really are. And I think that if the church is to thrive, it has to make space for that. I think Jesus was the type of person who spoke truth to power. He was the person who called it how it was. He said, even if it hurt your feelings, even if you didn't like it, if anyone is to follow me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow. That was a hard thing, you know what I mean? Render to Caesar what is Caesar, render to the Lord what is Lord, or God what is God. Like, that's a hard thing. Eat of my flesh, drink of my blood. Like, what you talking? You talking real crazy. And for somebody to accept that, even not even understanding what that really meant, you know, I think that you can trace it back to him. Like, he was able to speak things to the people who was oppressing him. You know, you got to think about the fact that they were under Roman rule, you know, in this culture that he's in. You know, first of all, if you even think about from his birth, they tried to assassinate him on his birth. You know what I'm saying? He had to hide in a place called Egypt, you know what I mean, to escape persecution and face death threats. You know, this is the story of before that, he was born in a manger in the inn because they didn't have any space for him because his parents support ain't had no money. He had a teenager. Like, he was from the marginalized and oppressed. And so when he got up and he finally rose to, I'm not even saying the power, but got a little bit of fame and people started to notice him, the things that he was saying was so opposite and counterculture to the norm that they killed him for it. I think a lot of times hip hop has that same influence and power. You think about what's happening now and how they're trying to stop the press, you know, the media for opposing, you know, what the government is saying. And a lot of these are hip hop media heads. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to the Breakfast Club. You know, you see what happening with Charlemagne and things like that. Like, all those things play a role. Charlemagne is able to speak the way he's able to speak because he was raised in a hip hop generation, you know what I mean? And his background is in that. And so I think in music and in lyricism and in messages, you know, Tupac said himself, you got money for wars but can't feed the poor. And that was in 90, that's in Keep Your Head Up. That was in 93, 4, whatever like that. And now we do got money for wars, but you can't feed the poor. Like, it hasn't changed. And I think being able to give voice to that matters. And if the church doesn't speak to that, if the church doesn't allow newer ideas and newer influences and changes with the times, I'm not saying you have to get rid of the scriptures, because I think the scriptures is the foundation. You have to be able to, but your interpretation has to be able to speak to the people. Jesus was able to use parables because the people around him were like farmers. They knew farming technology. So that's why he says, you know, when you plant a seed, does it not grow in water, and all these things like that? If you scatter the seed to this ground or this ground or this ground, because he was using analogies and metaphors to talk to the people so they can get it. If we want to be transformational, radical people, disciples of Jesus, then I think we have to do what he did. We got to speak to the people where they are. And younger people are always going to be our future. If you don't embrace younger people, if you don't embrace their culture, if you don't embrace what they're saying in a real authentic way, I'm not saying cosplay or pander to them. What I'm saying is, if you don't engulf yourself into what they're doing, then the church is going to die eventually, because you don't have any new blood coming in. That's what any organization, it's just not in church, in businesses, in Greek letter fraternities, sororities, you know what I'm saying? In schools, you keep having a freshman class, because if you don't, once the seniors are gone, it's going to be a wrap. There's nobody going to be able to teach. There's nobody going to have any culture, nobody swag, no juice, no life, and no love. So I think that the church has to think beyond where they are. They got to pivot, just like when the pandemic hit and people had to pivot from having in-person services to online. That boosted people's membership a lot. You know what I'm saying? And they I don't know if people really adjusted back to, like, you know, well, we're gonna shut down our online presence or we're gonna keep it. You know, that's those pivotal moments. But you can still, I think people still yearn for the Holy of Holies. They still yearn for something authentic and real, and they still yearn for the God of the universe to be able to show up in Nazareth to them, even though people may feel like there's nothing good that can come out of it.
Speaking of nothing good coming out of Nazareth, that is a perfect way to describe the emergence of hip-hop on the scene. I asked X to break down for the listener, what is the history, the origin story of hip-hop, in case those who are listening might not be aware.
August 3rd, 1978. There's a house party going on in Sedgwick Avenue by a man named DJ Kool Herc. He puts on this house party. It's like a rent party, birthday party, just to throw some things on. And as he's spinning records, right, he uses the break beats in the records, and he keeps looping the break beats over and over and over again. And that breakbeat becomes like the foundation for what we call hip hop. Now, in the Bronx, you have the Bronx is on fire. There's a lot of fires going on. There's gangs. There's political things going on in the city, and the youth of the city felt like they needed something to kind of express themselves. So you have Kool Herc put on the first hip hop party. From there, you hear different DJs who really are the foundation in the bedrock of what hip hop is. They start to put on like park parties, and they start to DJ outside. And then you see these kids who are breakdancers, we call b-boys. They start to get cardboard. And they start to dance outside at these park jams. That's what they call. And you have artists who are graffiti artists. They start to do graffiti on the walls and on the trains. And then as these DJs are mixing at these park jams, you get an MC, which is master of ceremonies. Some might call it a mic controller. Somebody who can really just keep the party going, and they're really hyping up the DJ. That's their whole goal and mentality. And then you have certain DJs like Grandmaster Flash, who really creates the turntable. So you have, he takes a crayon and he marks where the breakbeat is in the record, so he can always go back and refer to it. You got DJ Hollywood, who puts on these parties for like disco. You got to think of this era, like disco is right fading, and so we're transition rock and roll and stuff. And he puts on these parties for like in what is it, Club 78, Disco 7, whatever like that main club was back in the 70s. But then because of that, you have the rise of the Sugar Hill Gang, and the Sugar Hill Gang drops Rapper's Delight, and Rapper's Delight becomes like this big hit, but really, if you want to think about it, you think of Curtis Blow. He made a song called Christmas Rapping, on Christmas. And Curtis Blow kind of gets people to feel like, oh, this art form that can actually be recorded, Rapper's Delight. And then it just takes off from there. You have The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, which I believe might be hip hop's first conscious record. You have LL Cool J drop I Need Love, which is kind of like hip hop's first love song. And then all of a sudden, all of these players who are a part of this culture in New York City really get together, and they start to form like a business. And they're like really doing it off of just trial and error, really. Def Jam, because with Russell Simmons, and becomes like this big entity that everybody wants to be a part of. And at this time, hip hop is not played on the radio. R&B is really big. Disco kind of fades out. And so you have these young people just trying to start really a revolution that most people think is not going to last for the 50 years that it has been here. They think that it's going to fade away. You're not going to be able to make any money off it. You're not going to be able to feed your families. And it's very new. And so, but it speaks to the times, because there was broken glass everywhere. Like, don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like talking about the trials and tribulations that these kids are facing in New York City, these young adults. And hip hop gave them the vehicle to be able to express themselves.
Like Nick, X does not believe all hip hop can function as a resurrection technology. But when I asked him to explain to us how we know what is what, here is what he had to say.
With that in mind, you're going to have people who are stand-up individuals, and you're going to have people who are fugazi. And hip-hop is going to give you both and allow you to choose, who do you decide you want to rock with, who do you want to identify with, who you want to be with, And I think that because of that, for every Lauryn Hill, there's a Sexy Red, okay? Neither one are bad artists. They have different messages. and they speak to different audiences, and you can choose whether or not you identify with sexy, or you can choose whether you identify with Lauren. You can choose whether you identify with Kendrick. You can choose whether you identify with Drake. You might identify with both. There is this nuance in this struggle. What Galatians would say, my spirit wars with the flesh. You know what I mean? My flesh wars with the spirit. There's this tug of war, the duality that I think hip hop puts on Front Street. I think the church doesn't put it on Front Street. It doesn't acknowledge. It doesn't make space. Let me say not. I'm gonna say in general, because I'm pretty sure there's some pockets of churches that aren't mega churches or aren't social media stars that may have that nuance. But I think it doesn't. We don't put our ish on blast, especially the black church. We have this sense of needing to protect what is sacred, holy, or our business to ourselves. So we don't tell you that I got an issue with my finances. I'm not going to print out the financial statement so you can be able to see it. I'm going to try to hide and try to figure out, or that I really, it's hard for me to step away from oatmeal raisin cookies, and I'm addicted to those. It's like, I don't want to tell you what's really going on. And I think with hip hop, you don't have that. They're going to tell you what's really going on and let you decide whether or not you want to accept them for who they are or not. I think that's something we can learn from. And Pastor O'Carey talking about the wounded healer. Like, people want to hear from those that they can relate to, who understand, versus those that are kind of just speaking from theory or like some ideological perspective. You'll quote David, who did all the Psalms, and he was great, and he was a man after God's own heart. However, he also set up a man to get murdered. You know what I'm saying? Because he wanted some. You get it. You know what I'm saying? My man's is watching a woman, take a bath outside and said, I want her. Slept with her. Killed her husband. Lied about it. You know what I'm saying? Or tried to cover it up at least. But he's a man after God's own heart. So how come a prostitute, or someone who would deem as a hoe, or a person who doesn't have the best lyrics or the best resume or pedigree, not be seen as somebody who's after God's own heart as well?
If you've ever been in love, and I mean in the thick of it, I like you, I love you. That's not always enough. When you feel like that person literally lights your insides on fire, you're going to find all the analogies for flames and embers that's available to you. Because you got to understand what I mean when I say what I say. So I think same way how we can use words to connect to each other, they also can help to connect us to the beyond and the spirit and God. And I think for me as a poet, I think the exploration of the language is a really nice part. Like digging in a cereal box to find the treat inside of it. It's worth the dig to find that's the word I want to use. That's the feeling I want to convey. That's the memory I want to evoke and conjure, to make sure you understand how much this shit sucks. And I think all of that is worth it.
Whether it is embodied forms of meaning making, using metaphor and language in theopoetics, or it's the truth-telling and authenticity and rawness of hip-hop, both of them show how language, wordplay, and wit help us to participate in sacred refusal, just like Baby Suggs in the Hush Harbor. What enslaved people did with whispered prayers, ring shouts, and moans, the youth of the Bronx did with turntables, cardboard, and rhyme. They birthed a whole new world for themselves. They learned how to do God talk from the block. And to me, hip-hop is a carved-out clearing for radical truth-telling. It's a place where we name what yonder tries to silence. We move, we breathe, we become, not in spite of the flesh, but through it. In our next episode, we're going to dive deeper into the work of our guests and explore how they see resurrection technology at work in their lives, in their communities, and in the sacred things that they're building in the world. Because resurrection isn't only an end times doctrine, it's also a daily practice.
Thank you for listening to Black Modern Mystic, as made by Dr. Mommy. Oh, and don't forget to support the show. Bye.